Hello, everyone. Authentic leadership. To me, the best way to understand what that concept is by breaking up the concept into two concepts. What is leadership and what is authenticity? And leadership is far more than some special individual leading, guiding people to getting certain things done. To me, a leader is someone who can be of service to people, and through that service, people can develop a greater appreciation for themselves and a greater appreciation for the world. So, in that sense, we are all leaders, right? Now, how do you become a leader? Someone who can service people in a way that can enhance their ability to understand themselves, to appreciate themselves, develop some empathy for the rest of the world. This is where authenticity comes in. We have to reclaim the real me, the real self, which I call the authentic self, the self that we presently embrace and identify with, and in my opinion, is the self that society helped to condition. Is the self that in sociology we call it the self of society, or the personality of society. So we were conditioned to be who we are. However, we were born as authentic beings. As small children, we had the capacity to always be passionate, to always be happy, to not to divide things into segments, separations. We saw everything as one. As children, we also cared for one another. We had compassion for everyone. So authenticity is a self that really belongs to all, or it's a self that encompasses all. So an authentic leader then, or authentic leadership, is the ability to first and foremost to see the world as one, to see people as part of this oneness, and then to respond to people from that perspective. To service people without having to anticipate anything in return, without having to use the rational mind to decide whether or not we should take action, that we should be of service. The authentic leader almost intuitively knows what he or she needs to do. So, it's not something that we think about, it's something that is already in us. And so we need to reactivate, that self that belongs to everyone. It has been repressed by society conditioning, but it's still within us. It's just, laying dormant, waiting for us to kind of knock on his door and say, come out, please be my guide again. So the person, the leader, is really working out of the guidance of his or her inner self, more or less. Because most of us believe that whoever we happen to be, or whatever we have made ourselves to be, is it. You think that whoever you are at this moment, that is who you are and what defines you. So the process begins by acknowledging that we do not know the real me. Okay, that the real me has kind of been hidden from us. So it begins with that. It begins with an inquiry into your own consciousness. Your consciousness, it goes almost like a contradiction, right? Because consciousness is awareness. Well, your consciousness is unaware or is unconscious of the real self. Most people are not willing to do that. You know, I also teach. I'm a professor, and most of my students show a great deal of resistance, accepting this notion that they don't know who they are. So after making that initial inquiry, then you have to start figuring out who you really are at the moment. That means taking an inventory of your values. What are the values that define you? Where do they come from? What are the central ideas around which you have built your life? And where do they come from? What are your beliefs? What are your central beliefs? Right? So then once we create this list, this shopping list of things that define us, and then we figure out where they come from, because for the most part, they come from your parents, your teachers, the media, your peers, and so on and so forth, all of whom, for the most part, were not authentic. Right? They were teaching you what they learned from someone else. Right? Then you decide, is this how I want to continue living my life? Because after all of these things that define me really belong to someone else, or belong to factors outside of me. Am I willing to take the risk of stepping outside? I call transcendence. Transcending the self that I've always known. Am I willing to take that risk and engage in this process of transformation that is going to create something new, something different? Now, if you're willing to do that, then you start on the path, right? And that means being very tentative to your thoughts, to your ideas. What are some of the things that are constantly coming up? You got to be very, I call it, just being awakened. Living for the moment. Knowing what you're thinking all the time, and knowing the things that you're thinking is provoking you or stimulating you to do. Just watching yourself carefully. Something that we don't do. The society doesn't allow us to do that, right? The society promotes the notion of multitasking, doing a series of things at the same time. Well, if you're doing a series of things at the same time, when do you get to focus on yourself, right? When do you start, putting a moment of concentration onto your ideas, onto your beliefs? Because you have to find out how those things really run your life, right? Like sometimes you have a desire for doing something, often something out of the ordinary, and then the wired mind, the mind that is conditioned, convinces you not to, right? And then you ask your question, well, why did I do that? Well, probably you were not focused enough, and the old you, the conditioned mind, or the wired mind, was the one that kind of guided your behavior. But, it's a process that most people are not willing to take, because it's a process that leads to total transformation. It's going to take you into the unknown. You don't know what is going to come out of this authentic you. And imagine a scenario, which is the typical scenario, by the way, where people are serving as leaders in all kinds of capacities, and yet they do not know who they really are. It seems to me that is a contradiction. How can you lead without knowing who the real you is. Because you're leading on the basis of ideas, on the basis of values and norms that society or the organization for which you happen to belong teach you, right? This is what society gives you to work with. And so you're promoting the values, the norms, and the beliefs, and so on and so forth of society. And oftentimes you don't even know what those things stand for in the first place. So for me to be an effective leader, you have to become the real you. You have to reclaim the real self. And for the most part, what we have teachers, for example. And by the way, they mean well. Leaders of this type or the other, teachers, social workers, and so on and so forth. People who mean well. However, they are restricted by how much they can do on your behalf or how well they can do their job by the fact that they have limited knowledge of the real self. And until you know who the real you are, only then can you truly deliver that product, that service. I tell my students who are interested in pursuing this degree or the other degree, or I always ask them, well, how did you arrive at wanting to become this or that? Mm-hmm. Actually, I just came out of a meeting and someone in the meeting was talking about the fact that the real self for him was music, but his parents persuaded him to take a different course, to spend many, many years doing something else, being the inauthentic self, right? Because the authentic him was music.
Yeah.
So until you find who you really are, you are going to be persuaded to follow this academic program and become this kind of professional. And oftentimes you're doing it because this is what people are telling you to do. But what you want to do, that which is inside of you, right, never comes to pass. Because it has never been given the opportunity to really express itself. Actually, most people don't even know that there is this very special, I call it greatness, that there's greatness in them. And I really think that our responsibility, the reason we walk on this earth, is to unearth, to bring forth that greatness for ourselves and to give it to the rest of the world. Yeah. But that is not how society socializes us. Society wants us to become whatever, And, we trust society because since you first entered school, you have been pretty much, doing pretty much what your teachers have asked you to do. Well, I don't know if I have a program per se. This talk comes out of a book that I wrote called The Struggle for the Authentic Self. And in the book, I do a couple of chapters on the function of the mind, because that's another thing that we do not know, how the mind works. And in fact, we are what our mind makes us to be. I think we need to know, what happens in terms of the way that we think, and how our thinking is what creates our reality, whatever we happen to become. And so, unless we know how that functions in our mind and our consciousness, we will never have an opportunity to alter those thoughts because we don't know how they work, right? So someone here who's interested in pursuing leadership roles, should begin by contemplating the idea that maybe they need to know how, not only how the mind works, but everything in their body works. But certainly that's a place to start, okay? Because in our minds, we have a level of consciousness called the subconscious mind. And that represents, I call it a warehouse. It's a computer where all the data, all the information that you are exposed to, particularly that information that is repetitive, it gets stored there. And then, and we also have another level of consciousness called the conscious mind. Now, we should be acting our lives through our conscious mind, right? In other words, we should always be aware. It's interesting that most of the time, our behavior is sparked by our subconscious mind. You know, like you could be talking to one of your friends and not necessarily listening to what she's saying, but you're responding to her, right? Because you have done it again and again and again, that it doesn't really require you to be conscious of your own conversation, right? Mm-hmm. So, you know, we're not informed of how the subconscious mind runs our lives. You know, we should be run by our conscious mind, right? We should be attentive, we should be paying attention to ourselves and to others, and accordingly, you know, we should respond, but we don't do it that way. So learn how this thing works, because it's going to take you very far. The other thing is, and I do this with my students all the time, I ask them to think back to their early childhood years and try to remember what were the things that really make them happy and excited and passionate. Because conditioning or socialization has a tendency, you know, not only to take that authentic self and repress it, but it also begins to subdue our passion, our creativity, our fire. If you walk around campus, for example, people your age who should be passionate all the time, they're walking around with no feelings, no emotions. You know, as if they've been forced into doing things, you know. Oh my God, I have to go to my intro to sociology class next. Oh, where's the fire? You know, regain that. You have to regain that fire. And you regain it by trying to remember, you know, those early years when everything was beautiful, when everything was fun, you know. What did you really want to be when you were 5 years old, when you were 7 or 10 or whatever? You know, before socialization took over and converted you into, you know, this person that you happen to be. Early years are very important, and they carry a lot of messages. One of which is, this is how or who or what you were supposed to be. I think to become an authentic leader is very risky. Because it requires you to be true to yourself, to find the real you, and it's risky because most people don't want to go there. You know, they rather continue to live as they've always lived, because the minute that you start going in there into your inner self, you don't know what you're going to find. And that's another thing that society has made us accept, you know, this notion that we live always knowing where we're going, you know, that we move on this linear line, this linear process, knowing each step along the way. The authentic self doesn't work like that, you know. It's very open. You know, it's not guided or restricted by this linear paths. But this is the only way to live. For me, if I cannot live being the authentic self, because I was something else at one point, and I had to, because I'm much older than your typical undergraduate student, my journey back was much longer, and it was much more painful. But I knew that there was something not right. Most students know that there's something not right with the way that they're living. Every once in a while, you have an experience, whether it is through a dream, an encounter with someone, a movie, a song, whatever. You have a moment where that authentic self kind of knocks on your door. You develop a feeling like you want to do something out of the ordinary, or a moment when you contemplate yourself long enough to realize, what is that I'm doing with myself? And yet we don't want to pay attention to those moments. We disregard them and just continue on. And so, if there's anything my message is, be truthful. Even if it's painful.
Yeah.
Because in the pain, one of the things I talked about in the keynote when I was here back in the fall, is that we fear pain, we fear suffering, and yet it's in the pain, it's in the suffering where the treasure lies. Your job is to be willing to go through the pain and the suffering. There's something very special there. You just have to take the risk to find it.